We live in a world where we have much technology. I think we have to admit that. And when we think about the cell phone, we think about our phones that are attached to our hip and our hand most of the time, where it gets aggravating to see, well, how come that person's still at the stoplight? It's green, and green, it's green, and green, and they're looking at their cell phone. We become part of this society where we have this technology, and it's there. And there's nothing wrong with technology. The word tech means the idea of weaving together. Things are weaving together in order to help us. And there's a lot of technology that indeed helps us in our work. And is also there for our recreation. And no one's condemning that. I'm not there tonight to condemn it at all. Some say that the games that our kids play on helps their mental capacity, where they become more intelligent, maybe, when they play Minecraft. They pick up things, they're going to build things, they're going to be constructive. And you as a parent says, that's something that I want for my child when he comes of age, or when she comes of age and she wants to have these games. They're there. Their presence. They can keep children occupied for a long time. They're entertaining to them. And they get involved with them. And whether they're good for them or not, I'm not discussing that, because there's so many games to go through. There are over 309 million people that are gamers today. And some children, they have their PlayStation and Xbox, and they get gifts, and these games come through. PlayStation in my day, if someone came from the future, said, we're going to get you a PlayStation, I said, Mommy, we already got one. It's called a sandbox. Boys get their little trucks out there, and they play in the sand. That's our PlayStation. No, you're going to get something greater than that. And people make the games, and they have the individual characters. Sit down and talk to your children someday. They're playing these games, and ask them, what does this character do? What does that character do? People get involved with the games, and they have their characters and their heroes in a sense that this is what this one can do, that's what this one can do, and they've spent their time, and their brains are working, and their imagination is working, and they are involved in learning that field, that particular PlayStation game, that particular battle, that particular event, that particular time where I'm picking up stuff and going to construct stuff on Minecraft. And that may be good in itself. Nobody's condemning that, but it takes our time in any use of any technology we have. And time is precious. And there's the spiritual side of our being, and it starts early with our children. And sometimes we have to kind of say, all right, here's a time that's being here. What am I doing now to increase their spiritual well-being, their spiritual IQ? Games come and go. I thought Mario Brothers was the ultimate. Mario's, I can't even say it anymore. Guitar Hero was kind of fascinating to me. Goes by the wayside. We want a new game. We want more characters. But the Bible, it's there forevermore. And as a parent, there's a sense that what can I do? Here's things that may be writing themselves and that sort of thing. But the Bible, we're looking at action heroes. The Bible has character heroes. That what we can do as we strive to raise our children the way that they should go is to increase their spiritual IQ. And what's fascinating about this is that the stories that we hear, though we don't see them decked out on the screen, we can see them in our mind's eye. We can imagine the battlefields. We can imagine the time. We can imagine what it's like to be looking up at a big giant, and I'm just a little boy. Do we get that story in the minds of our children? Well, briefly, we're going to put them there tonight. Oh, it's got a real scene, and these aren't made-up characters. There was David and Goliath. And you'll find it in 58 verses of 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. There's your script, parents. You study it, and you think about it, you meditate upon it, and what you'll find is some beautiful scenes to paint for your children. Oh, you may not have the overall view of this valley, but it's real. It wasn't made up. And when you open the 17th chapter, you'll find that the Philistines gathered together their armies in battle, and they were together at Soka, but that belonged to Judah, and it camped between Soka and Azekah. You can look at there. Soka's over here on the far left, Azekah's down here, and the Philistines were there in between there, just like the Bible says. There's a place where you can picture in your mind. There was a place that's there. There's indeed the Eli Valley, and over here on the other side, on a hill and a mountain, there's where the Israelites were encamped. And they were all had their forces in array. And Goliath was going to be the champions because, back in that day, your armies were not facing each other to battle yet. You'd send out a captain or a leader of the group, and if one wins, then the rest will be servants. So they would send out their representative. The Philistines had a man by the name of Goliath. And when you looked at Goliath, he wasn't like any ordinary man. Give me any basketball player in the NBA, and I'll put Goliath, and he'll look a little bit shorter. Because Goliath, he was 6.5 cubits. Well, I don't know what that means, Mommy and Daddy. That means 9.5 feet. Because you know how many inches were in a cubit? 18 inches. Let's multiply that by 6. 108. And let's take your span of when you get big, your span of your hand will be 6 inches. And then you know what? That's 9.5 feet. You don't think you can get a child's attention? As the story is unfolding, 2 times that the King Saul said, "You're just but a youth." And when Goliath saw him, "You're just but a youth. You come out here with dogs and sticks, and you're sending him out to battle." And you know why David's finally out there? David had 3 older brothers. They said, "You just got a naughty mind. It's evil. You're just curious. You should have been back home in Bethlehem looking after the sheep, and now you're here." And see, those 3 men weren't standing up, and they weren't going to fight. You know why? Let me read you. And every little boy will understand it. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him and were sore afraid. He's bigger than I am, Mommy. He's bigger than I am, Daddy. He's 9.5 feet tall. It's almost the top of this screen. What he had on his chest weighed 122 pounds. The head of his weaver's spear, so big, it was 15 pounds. He just carried around. And all the grown men saw him and fled. That is a real feeling in the hearts of people when they're getting ready to fight someone. I remember days of football, guys would wear white, all white, because they look bigger. We said, well, we'll just make them think that we're bigger. So just wear all white uniforms today. Oh, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Let's go get them. And here was David said, "I'll go out and fight him." He's defying the people of Israel, defying their God, and he's after idols. I'll go fight him. And you know what caused him when Saul said, "You're just but a youth"? We have a flashback scene. We go to a new screen. And we flash back to when David had been even younger than he is. And the Bible tells us that I remember, I delivered my sheep from the paw of the lion and from the bear. There's a scene of action. And he may be not throwing footballs for at a time or giving shooting a dart or shooting a gun. But he held off as a shepherd, a bear and a lion, young man doing that. And he remembered that. God was there delivering him. Got a bear and a lion I fought. I can take care of Goliath. You begin to see the hero of faith and trust. And it brings forth courage in him. So Saul said, okay, but you need to get on some armor. You need to go fight him, and here's my armor. And I can just imagine, and you can paint the picture, it dwarfed him. He said, you don't look like a tough army man. That didn't fit you. But it's what he wanted on him and David said, no, I haven't proved it. But I tell you what I have proved, in essence, because this is what he does. He goes to a brook and finds 5 smooth stones. He didn't need a 6 gun, that carries 6. He had a slingshot, had a wallet, and 5 smooth stones. Cut to the end, it only took 1. And see, we're just preparing the scene for the battle. And sometimes the imagination of a child and of a young person, that's what it's all about. And you can paint that scene, parents. You got the script, you got the story. You not only have the scene where they are in real life places upon this planet, but you have a little scene that came before that affected his courage. It affected his faith that he had in God. So when the battle ensued, that 1 stone hit him in the head and he went to the ground. Now this is maybe something that we'll wait till later to tell them about. They may not be ready for the beheading of the giant. You can do that at your discretion. But he killed that giant, severed his head, and he would walk around with it after that particular occasion. Now, there is a real live place in this world. It's not in man's imagination where they kind of construct Naperville or whatever place you live in. And these are real life people that lived. And it's a real life occurrence that took place. I think there's a lot of action in God's character heroes. And we can inject it. We can say, here's an opportunity. And you're not sitting here condemning him, but there's a time-consuming thing. And we want to make sure this gets out there. And you don't have to be boring, do you? To tell the stories that we have in our Bible. See, David indeed was courageous. But see, we got other games to play. And the next 3 games are women, girls. They may not be able to shoot things up. They may not be out here trying to play army and all of that. But the Bible has something for your young girls in your family as you raise them. And they're character heroes. We have one chapter in our Bibles, Judges the 4th chapter, where there's a woman named Deborah. And here our young girls can look up and say, well, here are people in the Bible, and that was a lady. You know what she was? She was a judge of Israel. She's the only lady that I know was named with a name that's named a prophetess of God. And she wrote a beautiful song with Barak. Songwriter, judge, prophetess. She'd be giving judgments under the palm tree, and she was a judge of Israel like Samuel. I mean, like Samuel, like Samson would be. Elah and the rest of those. But it's interesting that she doesn't rule over men in the sense of how a man loses his place of authority. As a prophetess, she'd be getting information from God and giving judgments unto the men. And she says, Barak, you need to rise up. God is going to defeat the army of Jabin. Sisera, who is the main general, he's going to be defeated. So here was giving information, not ruling over a man. Here was giving information unto the people as they needed it under her judgeship, because she was a prophetess. And you'll know that she didn't take over the authority of a man. She just exhorted a man to let's do what God says to do. He said, I'm not going to battle until you go with me. She went with him. Well, if you want a map of this, it's kind of southwest of this Sea of Galilee. Up there in the northern portion of Judah, tribes of Naphtali. And you got the Mount Tabor, the Kishon River. The battle happens at Mount Tabor. Real life place. And Sisera had 900 chariots. Oh, it's just not one little chariot. It's not one little cannon. It wasn't just a few men. It's 900 chariots. And that would make you fearful. But here was a woman giving encouragement to a man to order to go into battle and do what God says was going to happen. They defeated the army, but something occurred because, see, Deborah heard a message from God as a prophetess and said, Barak, this won't be for your glory. You're going to do what God wants you to do. You're going to lead the troops. But Sisera is going to be killed by a woman. And you see how that plays out. There's a rout taking place. Everybody's running for escape. Sisera runs to a tent of a woman who was indeed confederates with him. And he goes into her tent. And he asks for water, and she gives him milk. And she took her right hand to the hammer. See, I think she was right-handed. And she had a tent pin and drove it through his temple. You might want to wait a while before you tell the story. For more mature audiences, you make that judgment. But a woman took him out. And he, Barak, and being victorious, and Deborah wrote a beautiful song that exalted Deborah, exalted God. But her exhorting faith, she has faith, she has trust what God delivers her. She's faithful to judge that way and give the judgments how God wants the people to live. And she does that. And she's there to encourage them all the way because she had that faith. David's courageous. She's pretty courageous to go and where the battle is fought too. But she was exhorting the men in her life to stand as God had directed them to stand. She's just giving information. She's not teaching over a man. Never does. She had the talent to write a song, inspired of God, and judge according to God. God used her. She's in your Bibles. She's a character he wrote. A whole book is written about the next lady. There's the game you could get out. There's the next game in your series on your PlayStation. And your station is to try to learn more about God. And these characters come alive. They're real life people that lived in a particular time. And Ruth lived in a time. She wasn't an Israelite. But what we find is that she indeed was a lady that was her whole character was commendable. And the whole scene in Ruth, all the chapters, it always reminds me of that which has dignity and honor. It makes you say, I wish I could live in that society at that time. Maybe you realize, well, you don't have the technology. You're not even going to have a indoor plumbing. You want to live that way? But what I'm saying is that the dignity and honor that was extended to people, it just highlights. We're going to do what's honorable. Not easy. We're going to do what's honorable. And also dealing with famine that happens that brings forth these circumstances. There are a lot of things that we can read of painting the picture. But one of the things that we find Ruth hit on when she was being encouraged, when the husbands die, and here's Naomi, her husband had died, and we're going to, well, what's going to happen to the girls? And Naomi says, y'all just stay here. You go. You don't have to come with me. And that was being nice. That's being honorable. But Ruth rose up and wanted them to understand, I'm not going. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee. Ruth 1:16. And to return from following after these, talking to her mother-in-law. For whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people will be my people. Thy God will be my God. Well, she's not an Israelite. And here she's now looking at the God of Israel. She's looking at Naomi, and she's going to assist her, do what she can. And there's a faithful soul residing in the heart of a woman that could stay and move it down the line and going after the idolatrous gods, but she's already converted to the God of Israel. And so she goes back with her. Circumstances are such where you're going to have to glean the fields. And that was something that slaves would do, or servants would do, or people that were poor. Ruth didn't have a problem of working. She was going to work, and she would work very hard. And the second chapter presents that to us. Verse 7 says, let me glean, I pray you, and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came, and they have continued even from the morning until now, say that she tarried a little in the house. She took a break. But she kept working there. And kept working until it's time to work like the other men did. As the story unfolds, is that she learns there's a next of kin that she could be married to because her husband had died. And here's rich Boaz. It just so happens, there's the story. It just so happens how things fall into place. And he took her to be his wife. And in the 4th chapter of Ruth, we find at the end of the story, Naomi took the child that they had, and she's going to be laid in her bosom, nursing the baby. And the woman, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, this is born to Naomi. They called his name Obed. He's King David's grandfather. Did you imagine that? Obed, who is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Obed means a servant of God. What a name to be given to the son of Ruth and Boaz. But the whole picture just honorable. She goes to lay at the feet of Boaz. He said, I don't want a woman being known that woman's here at night, so she left very early. Nothing happened there. It's just the idea she wanted him to know, I want to be your wife. And he carried out what it took to make her his wife. And so here's just an honorable faithfulness. It's full of faith and trust. But she's out gleaning the fields. And what Boaz does, he just kind of said, leave a little bit more behind for her to feel, because she's a worker. And what a wonderful thing is that I'm not owed anything. World's not going to be easy for me. It wasn't easy for Naomi. It wasn't easy for her. But she kept doing what is honorable, what is right in the sight of God, and she worked hard. She gave herself, I will follow you wherever you go, Naomi. She was not selfish. She's selfless, honorable woman of faith. That's a neat story. Got the scene of grain fields. You got that. That's real life stuff. That's real things that happen in real life. And Ruth is there. Well, the last little game we're going to pick out that's going to kind of adventure of these character heroes is a lady named Esther. You can talk about Vashti. She has a book that in our Bibles that's all about her and the events that she went through. But Vashti was the queen before she was. And you can just stop Paul and say, you know what, Vashti, you know why she didn't become queen? She didn't remain to be queen? As you talk to your daughters, she wasn't going to allow the men in their drunken stupor to be looking at her. She had decency, and she was going to be modest, and she did not want them staring at her beauty in a drunken state. And she said, I will not go before them like that. And she was taken from her queenship. That was an honorable thing to do. It's a godly thing to do. And we might put that on your PlayStation next week. That might be a good one we're going to get another time. But tonight, we're going to look at Esther herself because God used that opportunity to bring in Esther. She was beautiful. And she was one that it was the beautiful virgin before the eyes of a Persian king. We're in the 5th century now, and you could paint that picture. You could go into detail of learning about Xerxes and during that time of the Persian Empire, because that really happened. These are real life people. They're not made up. And it's the events that took place, and she becomes the queen. And we find in verse 7, he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the maiden was fair and beautiful. And when her father and her mother were dead, Mordecai took her his own daughter. Now there's a story for you. You tell your daughter they didn't have a mom and dad like you had. She didn't have that. Her uncle raised her. You know what his name is? It's Mordecai. And that's a story in itself, isn't it? Because what happens is that Mordecai doesn't bow his knee to Haman to give him honor like he thought he should. That's real life stuff. That's jealousy. That's not something that's just make believe, but it's a real life experience. And what are you doing? I'm getting my daughters, I'm getting my sons, I'm spending some time where they're not going to be looking at this PlayStation game. They're going to be looking at God's station, and they're going to learn character, and they're going to learn about life. People get envious, and when they have power, they can do some damage to you when they're in power. And when Mordecai didn't bow his knee to Haman, Haman's going to get even. He's going to get even. So he's going to get rid of Mordecai. He built a gallows that's 50 cubits high. So we got to stop there. What's a cubit? 18 inches. Let's do some multiplication. I wonder how high that was. The mind's working. 75 feet. It's pretty high. And it's on those gallows. Did you know that's where Mordecai was to hang? Did you know that's where Haman is going to hang? You don't mean it. That's not going to happen, is it? Yeah. And the way it unfolded is interesting. Would you like to hear that part of the story? One night the king can't sleep. You ever seen mom and dad when they can't sleep? Sometimes they go read a book or hit the cornflakes. I don't know which one they go to. Or ice cream, whatever. This night he couldn't sleep. And he wanted the records to come. That's what a king does. I want to see what's happened to pass. And it just so happened that Mordecai had warned the king's officers there was a mutiny to take place and they're going to kill the king. And the message got to the king, and he thwarted that attempt, and those men were killed. Wow. All of a sudden, what did we do for Mordecai to honor him? Nothing. So we're going to do something for him. Haman's trying to kill him. And Haman has to honor Mordecai. Isn't that ironic? Can that really happen? Yeah, it happens. This is your story. This is the narrative, but it's the truth. It's really what occurred. And so when the feasts are taking place, where Esther is having to realize that now Mordecai, at that sense, is going to be killed and all the Jews are going to be killed. That's where you find the interesting statement that Mordecai comes to her and says, you're going to have to stand up, Esther. And we read in verses 14 following, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then will relief and deliverance rise to the Jews from another place. He believes they're going to be saved, but it won't be by you, Esther. But thou and thy father's house will perish. And this is the great statement. Who knoweth whether thou art not come to this kingdom for such a time as this? I can tell you that that's why God raised you up. That's why you replaced Vashti. I know that for certain. You don't. Who knows? And that's the way God's providence works. But he hadn't gotten a direct statement from God about that. Who knows, Esther? You're here, and you're the only one in this place at this time that can help your people. And Esther bade them to return and answer unto Mordecai, go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and ye fast for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast like manner, and so will I go to the king, which is not according to the law. I'm going to disobey the law for this of the king. If I perish, I perish. That's courage. And she put her trust in God. And she came before him. And all events, she has a feast, and all the things unfold. And we read in chapter 7 and verse 8, the king returned out of the palace garden in the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the couch where Esther was. The king came in with, he said, you tried to force the queen. He's begging for mercy, and he's saying she's going to rape her. That's the king's wife. So we're going to kill Haman. And they hung him on the gallows that he had prepared. Behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high. How high is that now? Oh, yeah, you got it, 75 feet. And Haman hath made for Mordecai, who spake good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. And the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. And God's plan, his providential plan, had worked. That's an interesting story to me. And it's about a woman. And chapters 9, 26 through 28 is where they are involved in thwarting the army of just annihilating the Israelites. And they celebrate a feast. The Feast of Purim. Purim means to cast lots. And those lots have been cast to destroy the people of Israel. And now the people who is going to destroy them are going to be destroyed. And they celebrate that feast. Did you know they still celebrate that? Even today? Yeah. Because it happened. It's history. And it's full of adventure. And you know what's impressive? Why didn't you change Esther to something else different than David? Because the character heroes could be male and they can be female in our Bibles. Story's totally different. 9.5-foot giant. Esther's not facing. A Persian Empire is getting ready to kill all the Jews she's facing. And she's going against the law of the king. You don't go to the king unless he tells you to come. And she's going to force the issue. If I perish, I perish. She has courageous faith. Like David has courageous faith. How many of your games that we see as our action heroes or women. Do girls play those games? I don't know. I can see why a boy would like them. But they may like the others too. And they can get involved with those characters, and that's their time spent, recreation. They may get smarter. I'm not even talking about that. I'm saying that there's a spiritual characters that are real life characters, and they have characteristics that a child can learn. And what's beautiful about, let's say, David, for example. We didn't talk about the story of his whole life. Young man, youth, courageous faith. And they can build on that story for themselves, and they don't have to get rid of that game called David. And they can see him in his weakness. They can see him in his sin. They can see him in his cowardness. And see how he comes out of that. Another character trait that's real. See, God's heroes in the Bible are not just varnished so everything will be just clean in the way that they're real life situations. But how much time do we spend with our children of teaching them the principles of the Bible when they're young, especially the stories when they're young? And that's something you can do to fight back against things that are inundating us as we children want things in recreation. We've got to fight for the time. It's the time factor. Because I know when they just spend just a little time, they get involved with the characters. And what a wonderful thing to walk away seeing faith being expressed with courage or exhortation. Seeing people living honorably, not thinking about selfishness, but selflessness, serving others, working as a principle of their life. Showing that here I am in a certain situation in life, I can make a decision. And I can remember Esther, if I perish, but this is what I must do. Having that type of faith and grounding them in those things. I just offer you something to do to fight back against the technology that's trying to control us. You buy something online and all of a sudden they say, you might like this. Well, who are you? I'm technology. And they can control your life. And you got to say, no. You're not going to control my time. In fact, my phone will be off all day tomorrow. Is that right? Are you going to control your technology? Well, I've got to have that by my side. Okay, work for that sort of thing. But after I play Words with Friends, I'm not going against that. But we have so many things to do, and they may be right in themselves. But the point is, how much are they robbing us from the spiritual time? And our children, they need it. And I'm just saying, there can be a lot of things that are exciting to people that will be there for the rest of their life. Teaching them character that's not made up. That's not just imaginative. These are things that happen to realize faith in God. Living an honorable life before God, living selflessness without but for God, serving others. And truly, God's my God. Having that type of spiritual commitment. These can be set forth in these stories. And I would encourage you and exhort you to make sure your children, before they leave your home, before they grow up, they know those characters inside out, and especially inside. This evening, if you're not a child of God, we want to encourage you to come to the Lord. It's the only way we're going to be able to face death, as we've been praying about tonight, going past this life, that we can be right with God and have our sins taken away because of the blood of Christ. We got to teach that truth to our kids as they grow up so they can become Christians. But if you haven't become a Christian yet, baptized into Christ, put on Christ in baptism, we want to encourage you to do so now as we stand and as we sing.